He never took alien traditions seriously, just another job, just another contract, until Commander Solari dropped the word bonding across the bar table. He nearly choked on his drink, laughing humans, and Solari didn't bond like that. Everyone knew that it was probably some weird translation error. But she didn't laugh, she just watched him with those glowing eyes, unblinking, unwavering, as if waiting for something. He leaned back, trying to shake off the weird tension that settled in the air. Come on, you're messing with me. Right, Solari warriors, don't bond with humans. She tilted her head in that strange avian way. Solari, do not joke about such things. You acknowledged my claim the moment you responded. He snorted, half amused, half nervous. Claim? What claim? I just thought it was a weird way of saying friendship, or whatever. Besides, you Solari don't even like humans. Her crest flared slightly, a sign of something he couldn't quite read. Irritation, amusement, something else. Humans misunderstand much, she said simply. But it does not matter, the process has begun. I will be by your side. Now he waved a hand dismissively. Sure, whatever you say, Commander. But inside, something about the way she said it sent a strange shiver down his spine. The conversation shifted, the bar noise swallowed them back into its chaotic hum, and he convinced himself it was nothing, just another odd alien custom to brush off. Then came the knock on his door. 3 sharp raps, firm measured. He blinked at the time. It was late, too late for visitors. Frowning, he set his tools down, wiping grease from his hands. As he approached the door, when he opened it, his breath caught just for a second. She stood there, Solari battle armor gleaming in the dim corridor lights, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, her glowing gaze steady, unreadable. I have arrived, she said, her voice calm, controlled, determined. He stared at her for a long moment, waiting for the punchline, but none came. Finally, he let out a short, awkward laugh. Arrive, for what? She stepped inside before he could protest, looking around his small quarters, her sharp gaze taking in every detail. This is where you live, she noted without emotion, dropping the bag to the floor with a heavy thud. Hey, hold on, he started, backing up as she moved further inside. What the hell are you doing here? She turned to face him, as if confused. I am fulfilling the bond. The what? You acknowledged it, I have accepted it. We are now bound. Her tone was simple, matter of fact, as if stating the weather. She spoke as if this was the most obvious thing in the universe, as if she hadn't just turned his life upside down in a single sentence. He ran a hand through his hair, laughing again, a little more uneasy this time. Listen, Commander Solari, I think we had a little cultural misunderstanding back at the bar. She said nothing, just watched him waiting. He sighed deeply. Okay, so what does this bonding thing actually mean? What exactly do you think I agreed to? Her gaze held his with an intensity that made his stomach twist. Protection, loyalty, shared purpose, a connection that cannot be broken. I will be at your side, always, until death and beyond. He felt the weight of her words settle over him, thick and suffocating like the air before a storm. She spoke with such certainty, such finality, as if this was already decided, as if his opinion on the matter was irrelevant. His stomach twisted, unease crawling up his spine as he took a step back, trying to create space between them. But she didn't move, didn't react, just stood there, calm, composed, patient, waiting for him to process what she had just said. Okay, he said, raising his hands as if to physically push back against the conversation. Let's just slow down for a second. You can't just show up at my door and declare that we're bonded, or whatever. That's not how this works, at least not for humans. Her crest flickered slightly, her version of a blink, her glowing eyes locked onto his, as if searching for something. You are mistaken. Human customs are irrelevant in this matter. You acknowledge the bond, therefore it exists. He let out a breathless, incredulous laugh, rubbing his temples. This is ridiculous, I laughed. That doesn't mean anything to me. Maybe to you it does. But humans don't form permanent bonds just because of a conversation at a bar. She tilted her head at him in that eerie Solari way, as if studying a strange new species. But you are not Solari. Exactly, which is why this doesn't work, he shot back, waving his arms in exasperation. I don't even know you. We worked together on some hull repairs and had a few conversations that said you can't just decide we're bonded based on that. Her gaze didn't waver. You misunderstand. The bond is not about time or familiarity. It is about recognition. My kind senses what cannot be spoken. You are the one. The one, what he repeated, baffled and just a little panicked. The one I will stand beside for the rest of my life, she said simply. He exhaled sharply, running both hands down his face. This is insane. You're telling me that just because I responded to your comment in a bar, you're now some kind of my lifelong guardian. It is not a choice, it is a fact, she replied, stepping closer, her presence suddenly too much, too intense. You do not have to understand it, only accept it. He backed up until his legs hit the edge of his bunk. This is crazy, even by Solari standards. I mean, I've worked with your kind before. I've never heard of this bonding nonsense before. Her expression remained unreadable. Only warriors bond, she said. And I am a warrior, great, fantastic. And what happens if I just say no, if I refuse to accept this whole bond thing? Then I will remain regardless, she said, as if it was the simplest thing in the universe. I will not force you, but I will not leave either. He let out a strangled laugh. And what if I leave the station? What if I jump on my ship and disappear into the void? Then I will follow. He opened his mouth to argue, but the words died in his throat. Something in the way she said it, no hesitation, no doubt, sent a chill through him. She wasn't joking, she wasn't lying. This wasn't some elaborate Solari prank, she meant it. His heart pounded against his ribs as he stared at her, trying to find some crack in her certainty. But there was none. She had already decided, already committed, and nothing he said would change that. He shook his head, pacing the small space of his quarters, muttering under his breath, "This isn't happening, this isn't real, I'm just dreaming. Maybe I hit my head during repairs, and I'm hallucinating. Yeah, that makes more sense." "You are not dreaming," she said simply. He turned to her, exasperation flaring. "What do you even want from me? How am I supposed to swear some kind of Solari warrior oath? Now do I have to fight duels in your honor? Am I going to wake up one day covered in tribal markings? What's the endgame here?" Her crest lifted slightly as if amused. "You must do nothing. I will fight for you. I will protect you. I will ensure your survival." That is all. He stared at her, chest rising and falling too fast. This was unreal. This was absolutely insane. And yet some small treacherous part of him whispered that it might not be the worst thing in the universe to have someone at his side, someone who wouldn't leave, someone who saw something in him worth bonding over. He shook the thought away. No, he needed to shut this down now. "Listen, I get that this means something to you. But you have to understand, I can't do this. I can't be whatever it is you think I am. You're going to have to find some way to undo this bond thing, because I'm not the guy you think I am." She tilted her head again, slow, deliberate. "There is no undoing." He groaned, gripping his hair. "Fantastic, just fantastic." He groaned, gripping his hair, pacing back and forth in the small confines of his quarters. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Out of all the things he had expected, after finishing his contract on this station, getting forcibly bonded to a Solari warrior wasn't even on the list. He stopped, suddenly spinning to face her, and found her still standing there, still watching, still waiting. "So that's it then?" he asked, voice sharp. "You just show up here, declare we're bonded, and now I'm supposed to live my life with a permanent alien bodyguard, whether I like it or not?" She inclined her head slightly, a slow, deliberate motion. "I do not guard you, I stand beside you." "Same difference," he snapped, throwing his arms up in exasperation. "And what if I don't want someone standing beside me? What if I want to be left alone?" "Then you will be alone with me present," she said with complete sincerity. He exhaled sharply, his frustration boiling over. "Listen, this is my life, my choice. You can't just decide this for me." "You did choose," she said, tilting her head again. "You acknowledged it. You did not reject it immediately when I spoke of bonding. If you had done so, then the bond would not have taken root. But you laughed, you considered it, you allowed it to exist, even in jest." He let out a bitter laugh. "So you're telling me that just because I didn't immediately shut you down, I somehow agreed to this insanity?" "Correct," she said without hesitation. His jaw clenched. He wanted to argue, wanted to tell her how absolutely ridiculous that was, but deep down something in her words made a terrible kind of sense. Solari were warriors. They didn't make idle commitments. If their culture functioned on this kind of instinctive recognition, then maybe she really did see something in him that even he didn't see in himself. But that didn't mean he had to accept it, didn't mean he had to just roll over and go along with it, right? He sighed, running a hand down his face. "Okay, Let's just say for a second, I accept that this bond thing is real. What does that actually mean? What changes? She stepped forward, slow, controlled her glowing gaze, locking onto his. Nothing changes, except that I will be with you always. I will not interfere with your choices. I will not control your life. I will only ensure that no harm comes to you. His brows furrowed. So what, you're just going to follow me around forever, like some kind of shadow? Yes. And if I leave the station, I will follow. And if I tell you to go away, I will respect your request, but I will not be far. If you ever call, I will come. He let out a sharp exhale, rubbing the back of his neck. You don't even know me. Why the hell would you do this? Why would you bond yourself to some random human contractor? Her eyes softened just slightly, as if she had expected the question, as if she had been waiting for him to ask. Because I've seen you, I have watched you work. I have seen your mind, your skill, your determination. You stand. When others falter, you fight. When others would surrender, I have known warriors less worthy of the bond than you. He swallowed hard. Something about the quiet certainty in her voice sent a strange feeling through his chest. He wasn't used to that kind of faith in him, wasn't used to anyone looking at him like he was something more than just another spacer trying to scrape by. But that didn't mean he could accept this. Not yet, maybe not ever. He took a step back, shaking his head. Listen, I don't know what you think you see in me, but I'm just a guy who fixes ships. I'm not a warrior. I'm not special. I don't deserve whatever this is. Her gaze didn't waver. What you believe does not matter. What is true does. He let out a ragged breath, frustration, exhaustion, confusion, swirling together in his head. Okay, fine, whatever you say, but don't expect me to just accept this overnight. I expect nothing from you, she said simply, only that you continue being who you are. He didn't have a response to that, because what was he supposed to say? What was he supposed to do? He was just an engineer, a nobody in the grand scheme of the universe, and yet standing before him was a Solari warrior willing to dedicate her entire life to him, as if he was something worth protecting, worth standing beside. He didn't know how to handle it, didn't know if he ever would. So instead of arguing further, he just sat down on the edge of his bunk, rubbing his temples. Fine, whatever, I don't have the energy for this right now. You can stay, but if you start treating me like some kind of fragile thing, I swear to God, I'll find a way to get rid of you. Her crest flared slightly, amusement, maybe approval. You will try and you will fail. He groaned again, flopping back onto his bed. This was going to be a nightmare. He lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the station around him, trying to convince himself this was some kind of elaborate prank, some bizarre misunderstanding that would sort itself out by morning. But the longer he lay there, the more he felt the weight of her presence in the room. She wasn't leaving, she wasn't second-guessing her decision. She was simply there, as if she had always been there, as if this was the most natural thing in the universe. Finally, he sat up, rubbing his face with both hands. Fine, you want to stay, then stay. But don't expect me to change my life for you. I have work to do, and I don't need some Solari warrior breathing down my neck every second of the day. She nodded once, as if she had already expected this. I understand. I will not interfere with your work unless it becomes a danger to you. Great, he muttered, dragging himself to his feet. He needed sleep, he needed time to think. But that wasn't happening right now. He gestured vaguely at the cramped space of his quarters. I don't exactly have a guest room, so I don't know where you're planning on sleeping. I do not require sleep as often as you, she said, but when necessary I will remain here. He sighed. Of course you will, whatever, just don't stand over me watching me while I sleep or something creepy like that. I will not disturb your rest, she said calmly, but if there is danger I will act. He rolled his eyes, collapsing back onto the bed. Yeah, sure, whatever you say. Morning came too quickly, and when he opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was her. She wasn't hovering over him, she wasn't looming, but she was there seated on the floor, cross-legged, her eyes closed, her breathing slow and measured, like she had been meditating or maybe just waiting. He groaned, stretching as he sat up. You're still here? Yes, she said simply. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, rubbing his face with both hands. Fantastic, just fantastic. He stood, moving around his small quarters, grabbing his gear for the day, his work vest, his tools, everything he needed for another long shift in the shipyard. He could feel her watching, but she didn't say anything, didn't ask any questions, didn't offer any help. She just observed. Finally, as he was pulling on his boots, he sighed heavily. "So what are you going to do, just follow me around all day?" "If you permit it, yes." He scoffed. "And if I don't permit it?" "I will still be nearby, of course you will," he muttered, standing up and slinging his tool belt over his shoulder. "All right, whatever, let's get this over with. But if anyone asks, you're not with me, got it?" "Understood." He stepped out into the corridor, making his way through the station toward the docks, and as much as he tried to ignore it, he could feel her presence, just a step behind him, silent, watchful, steady. He wasn't sure if that made him nervous, or if it was starting to feel almost reassuring. The docks were already bustling with activity ships, coming in ships, leaving engineers and mechanics swarming like ants over hulls that needed patching, engines that needed coaxing back to life. He fell into his routine, quickly pushing everything else to the back of his mind, focusing on the work in front of him. But it didn't take long before he noticed the stairs people were watching him, watching her, some whispering, some smirking, a few looking downright uncomfortable. One of his co-workers, a stocky man named Dallin, sidled up to him, elbowing him in the ribs, real subtle, like, "Hey, so, are you picked up a shadow, huh?" He sighed, not looking up from his work. "Don't start, Dallin." "Oh, no judgment, just it's not every day a Solari warrior decides to claim a human heard about it last night. Figured it was station gossip. But I guess not, huh?" He tightened a bolt a little harder than necessary, grinding his teeth together. "She's not my shadow, she's just here." Dallin snorted. "Yeah, sure, buddy, just here. That's why she's standing over there, looking like she's ready to murder anyone who breathes too hard in your direction." He glanced over despite himself, and sure enough, she was there, arms crossed, standing near the entrance of the docking bay, her gaze scanning the area, not interfering, but definitely not just loitering either. Dallin chuckled, shaking his head. "Listen, man, you do you. But if you're bonded now, you might want to read up on what that actually means, cause, from what I hear, that's not the kind of thing you can just walk away from." He scowled, turning back to his work. "Don't need advice, Dallin." "Hey, I'm just saying, be careful with that one, Solari. Don't play around with this kind of thing. If she's serious, she's serious." He already knew that he had known it the second she showed up at his door, but hearing it from someone else just made it feel even more real, even more impossible to ignore. He exhaled sharply, focusing on his work, pretending that his life hadn't just changed in a way he wasn't ready to deal with, pretending that the weight of her gaze on him didn't make his pulse do something weird, pretending that he wasn't already starting to wonder if maybe, just maybe, this wasn't as bad as he had first thought. Hours passed, and he did what he always did, focused on the work, kept his hands busy, pushed everything else to the back of his mind. But no matter how much he tried to ignore it, he could feel her there, not hovering, not interfering, just present, a constant silent presence, like a shadow that refused to fade. It should have been unsettling, should have been annoying, but instead, it was just there, a fact, like gravity, like the hum of the station, like the grease under his nails, and the ache in his shoulders at the end of a shift. He sighed, stretching his back, stepping away from the open panel of the ship he had been working on, unrolling his shoulders. He needed a break, needed food, needed something to make this day feel normal again, even though normal had clearly been thrown out the airlock the second she showed up at his door. He glanced over, half expecting her to still be standing exactly where she had been before, but she wasn't there. For a second, his stomach twisted in a way he didn't like, a strange, brief flash of absence that felt too sharp, too immediate, and then he spotted her near the far end of the docks, speaking to someone. Not just someone, station security. His gut clenched, and he wiped his hands on his work vest before striding over. "Hey, what's going on here?" The security officer, a broad-shouldered woman with a cybernetic eye, looked him up and down with a neutral expression. "Your companion here has been flagged as an unregistered presence on the docks. Care to explain?" He sighed, already exhausted by this conversation. "She's not a security risk, she's with me." The officer raised an eyebrow. "With you?" "Yes." He could feel Solari watching him, and when he glanced at her, she was waiting to see what he would do, what he would say, not stepping in, not interfering, just letting him handle it, letting him claim the situation as his own. The officer studied him for a long moment, then glanced back at Solari. "Look, pal, I don't know what you got yourself into, but station protocol requires that all Solari warriors register their presence, especially if they're claiming a bond to a human." She turned her gaze back to him. Because in case you don't know, that comes with a whole list of implications that could affect station security and personnel interactions. So you got two options: one, you both come with me to get this sorted out, or two, she gets flagged as an unregistered combatant, and neither of you is going to like what happens next. He gritted his teeth, suppressing the frustrated groan rising in his throat. This was exactly what he didn't need today. More bureaucracy, more questions, more attention. He just wanted to do his damn job, not deal with whatever mess this bonding nonsense had dumped in his lap. Fine, he muttered, fine. Let's just get this over with. The officer nodded and motioned for them to follow. Xalari fell into step beside him, moving with that effortless grace of someone who was always aware of their surroundings, always prepared for anything. He could feel her gaze flicker toward him as they walked. But she didn't say anything, didn't ask if he was upset, didn't try to justify her presence. They reached the station security office, a sterile place full of monitors and personnel tapping away at terminals. The officer led them to a small room and gestured for them to sit. He hesitated, but Xalari sat without question, so he did the same. All right, the officer said, leaning against the desk, arms crossed. Let's make this official: name, rank, and purpose of presence on this station. He opened his mouth, but Xalari spoke first. I am Commander Xalari of the 7th Vanguard. My presence here is in accordance with the bond recognized between myself and this human. Her tone was steady, unwavering, absolute. The officer's cybernetic eye flickered. You're not stationed here. You're not on a mission for the Vanguard. So that means this bond is personal, not military, correct? The officer exhaled and looked at him. So I take it this wasn't exactly planned on your end. He let out a sharp, humorless laugh. You could say that, yeah. Well, too bad, because it's done now, she said, typing something into the console next to her. Like it or not, this bond is official, and the station has to acknowledge it, which means you two are now legally recognized as a unit. Any security issues involving one of you now involve both of you. Any disputes, any threats, any problems, if one of you is in trouble, the other is considered involved. She looked at him pointedly. You sure you want this? He opened his mouth, then closed it, because what was he supposed to say? No, of course he didn't want this. But what was the alternative? Kicking her off the station, trying to break something that apparently couldn't be broken, fighting against something he had no idea how to undo. Besides, she hadn't asked anything of him, she hadn't demanded anything, she was just there. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Does it matter what I want? Not really, the officer said with a shrug. Just thought I'd ask. She finished typing and leaned back in her chair. All right, you're both officially logged, bonded pair status, registered. Congratulations or condolences, depending on how you see it. She smirked at him. Hope you're ready for this, because from what I hear, Xalari take this stuff seriously. He glanced at Xalari, who was watching him with that unreadable expression, and something in his chest tightened. Yeah, he muttered, believe me, I got that part loud and clear. They left the security office in silence, walking side by side through the station corridors. The hum of machinery, the chatter of dock workers, the distant clang of metal against metal, all of it felt strangely muted, like the world had shifted slightly, like something irreversible had settled into place around him. He glanced at her. She moved with the same effortless grace as before, her posture steady, her gaze forward, like none of this had been unexpected, like this was all just another step in a path she had already accepted. He ran a hand down his face. So that's it then, we're officially bonded now. Correct, she said without looking at him. He exhaled. Great, fantastic, just what I needed. More paperwork, more station bureaucracy, more people looking at me like I signed up for something I didn't ask for. She didn't respond, didn't rise to his frustration, just kept walking until they reached the entrance to the docks, where she finally turned to face him, her gaze steady. You are angry. He let out a dry laugh. Oh, you think? Her crest shifted, slightly unreadable as always. If you wish to challenge the bond, you may do so before the council of my people. If they deem your argument worthy, the bond may be annulled. He stopped short, blinking at her. Wait, that's an option. I thought you said this was permanent. The bond is permanent for me, she clarified. For you, there are ways to sever it, if that is your wish. He stared at her, something about the way she said it, the way she phrased it, like she wasn't even considering that possibility, like it didn't matter whether he fought it or not, her path was already chosen. He crossed his arms And what happens to you if I do that, if I go before your council and say, I don't want this? Her gaze didn't waver, nothing changes, I will still be here. He exhaled, sharply shaking his head, unbelievable. So basically I go through all that trouble and you still won't leave. I will not bind you against your will, she said, but my choice remains mine. He rubbed his temples, muttering under his breath, this is insane, this is completely insane. She tilted her head, studying him. You do not wish to be alone, but you fear being chosen. His head snapped up. What the hell does that mean? You are wary of bonds of reliance of others, seeing worth in you, she said, as if it were a simple fact, as if she had peeled back his skin and looked straight into something raw and unspoken. You do not reject me because I am Solari, you reject me because you do not believe you are worthy of being bonded. His breath caught for half a second, something cold and sharp twisting in his chest before he forced a laugh. Nice theory, but you don't know a damn thing about me. I know enough. He scowled, pushing past her back toward his workspace. If you're gonna follow me, at least do it quietly. I've got work to do. She followed, but said nothing more. The rest of the day passed in a blur of movement of tools in his hands, of ship parts and diagnostics. But through it all he could feel her presence, always, just there, always just watching. And for all his irritation, for all his frustration, he never once felt like she was in his way. Never once felt like she was disrupting his work. She was just a constant, a presence that he couldn't shake. As his shift ended, and he packed up his tools, he glanced toward her, finding her standing near the edge of the docking bay, still as stone, eyes scanning the room, always watching, always calculating. He hesitated, then let out a breath. Fine, let's say I don't fight this. Let's say I just let this bond thing be. What then? She turned her gaze to him. Then you live your life, and I remain beside you. He ran a hand through his hair. And if I make choices you don't agree with, then you make them. I do not control you. He studied her for a long moment, still unable to wrap his head around any of this. Then finally, with a tired sigh, he nodded. All right, fine. Whatever you win, I give up. You can stay. But don't expect me to suddenly start treating you like some kind of partner, or whatever this is supposed to be. She inclined her head in acknowledgement. I expect nothing. He shook his head, muttering under his breath, and started walking back toward his quarters. She followed, but this time it didn't feel like she was just following him. This time it felt like she belonged there, like she had always been there. And that was the part that scared him the most. The walk back to his quarters was quiet, not the awkward kind of quiet, not the heavy kind, just quiet. She moved beside him without sound, without hesitation, as if she had always known his pace, always known how to match his steps. And maybe that was the part that unsettled him the most, how easy it was to fall into this rhythm with her. He swiped his access code, the door slid open, and he stepped inside, tossing his tool belt onto the small table in the corner. He turned, expecting her to linger outside, but no, she followed without pause, without hesitation, and the door slid shut behind her. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. So this is my life now, just me and my personal Solari shadow. Yes. He groaned, dropping onto his bed, rubbing his face. This is so messed up. She did not respond, did not move, just stood there watching, waiting, patient. He lifted his head to glare at her seriously. Do you ever relax? I am always prepared. He rolled his eyes. Of course you are, because why wouldn't you be always on edge, always watching, always ready to pounce on some imaginary threat? There are always threats, she said evenly, even if you do not see them. He scoffed. Yeah, well, maybe I don't want to spend my life looking over my shoulder waiting for something bad to happen. Maybe I just want to do my job, eat my meals, and go to sleep without worrying about some invisible danger. That is why I am here. He let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. Unbelievable, absolutely unbelievable. She tilted her head slightly. You do not believe me. Oh no, I believe you, he said with a sigh. I just don't understand why you care so much. She studied him for a long moment, then spoke with that same steady certainty. Because you are worthy. His stomach twisted, and he looked away, rubbing the back of his neck. You don't even know me. I know enough. He exhaled heavily, pushing himself up from the bed and pacing the small space. He keeps saying that like it's supposed to mean something, like I'm supposed to just accept that some warrior from a species I barely understand just decided I was worth protecting for the rest of my life. He turned to face her, arms crossed. What if I'm not? What if you're wrong? I am not wrong. He let out a frustrated laugh. You're impossible. Perhaps he stared at her, watching the way she stood, the way she never wavered, the way her eyes held no doubt, no hesitation, nothing but that same quiet certainty that was starting to chip away at the walls he had built around himself. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Whatever, I'm too tired for this. I'm taking a shower. Do whatever it is you do when you're not standing there staring at me. She nodded, and he grabbed a clean shirt before disappearing into the tiny bathroom, locking the door behind him, leaning against the sink for a moment, staring at his own reflection. This was real, this was happening, and no amount of denial was going to change it. He turned the water on, letting the steam fill the small space as he stripped down and stepped under the hot spray, hoping maybe, just maybe, it would wash away the tangled mess of thoughts in his head, but it didn't. When he finally emerged, hair damp, shirt sticking slightly to his skin, she was exactly where he had left her, arms crossed, eyes scanning the room as if she had never moved. He sighed, collapsing onto his bed, pulling the blanket over himself. Whatever you do, just don't wake me up, unless the station is literally on fire. Got it? Understood. He closed his eyes, letting exhaustion pull him under, and for the first time in a long time he didn't feel alone. He woke up slowly, groggily, his mind still tangled in the haze of sleep, and for a moment, just a moment, he forgot everything. He forgot the bond, the station security, the way his life had been flipped upside down. He forgot that he wasn't alone. Then he opened his eyes and she was there. Not looming, not hovering, just present, seated cross-legged on the floor near the door, her eyes half closed, her breathing steady like she had been meditating or simply waiting. His stomach twisted at the sight of her, not because she frightened him, not because he felt trapped, but because some part of him was already used to this, already used to the idea that she would be there when he opened his eyes. He sat up, rubbing his face with both hands. Morning, he muttered. Morning, she replied, her voice as calm as ever. He sighed, pushing himself out of bed, stretching the stiffness from his limbs. He needed coffee, food, something to start the day, something normal, even if normal was starting to feel like a distant memory. He moved around the small space, grabbing a ration bar and a cup of lukewarm station coffee, taking a slow sip before glancing at her. So, do you eat or what when necessary? He frowned. You mean to tell me you've just been sitting there all night, without moving, without eating, without sleeping? I do not require rest as often as you, he exhaled, shaking his head. Must be nice. She tilted her head, studying him. You are still uneasy. He scoffed. Yeah, no kidding, my entire life just got hijacked by an alien warrior who thinks I'm worth protecting for some reason. Forgive me if I need a little time to adjust. I understand. He let out a breath, taking another sip of coffee before running a hand through his hair. So what now? Am I supposed to do something? Am I supposed to act a certain way now that we're officially bonded? Because I have no idea how any of this works. You live your life as you always have, she said simply. He snorted. Right, because nothing has changed at all except for the part where I now have an elite warrior shadowing my every move. She did not argue, did not defend, just watched him with that same unwavering gaze. He sighed, shaking his head. All right, fine, whatever, I have work to do, so I guess we just get on with it. Yes. He grabbed his tool belt, slinging it over his shoulder before stepping toward the door, pausing briefly before glancing at her. You coming? Always. He didn't know why, but the way she said it made something in his chest tighten, made something shift in a way he didn't want to think about. They walked through the corridors side by side, and just like the day before, people noticed, they whispered, they smirked, they stared. But this time he didn't care as much. This time he wasn't as bothered. They reached the docks, and he dove into his work, letting his hands take over, letting himself slip into the rhythm of familiarity, ignoring everything else. But at some point he noticed something strange. Solari wasn't just standing idly while she was watching, yes, but not just him. She was watching everyone, everything, the workers, the ships, the security teams, the vendors along the walkways. She was tracking movements, scanning the crowd, calculating something he couldn't see. He frowned, straightening and wiping his hands on a rag. You see something I don't. Her gaze flickered to him and back to the crowd. There is a presence here, one that does not belong. His stomach dropped. What do you mean? A hunter, she said, her voice quieter than before, precise, focused. Someone is watching you, someone with intent. His pulse kicked up, and he forced himself to keep his expression neutral, trying not to look around, trying not to make it obvious. He swallowed hard. Any idea who or why? Not yet, but I will. He exhaled, running a hand down his face, because of course this day couldn't just be normal. Of course, something had to go wrong. He glanced at her, and for the first time he wasn't annoyed by her presence. For the first time he was relieved. So what do? We wait, she said, and when they reveal themselves we end it. He let out a breath, nodding slowly. All right, then let's see what happens next. The minutes stretched into hours, and he forced himself to focus on his work, forced himself to go through the motions as if nothing was wrong, but he could feel it, the weight of unseen eyes, a slow creeping awareness that someone was there watching, waiting, calculating. Solari did not move from her position, did not make any sudden gestures, but he could tell she was tracking every movement in the docking bay. She was still as stone, but he could feel the tension in her, the coil of a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. His hands worked automatically, tightening bolts, running diagnostics, checking ship systems, but his mind was elsewhere, running through possibilities, who would be watching him, and why he wasn't important. He wasn't special, just a dock worker fixing ships, and keeping his head down. Nothing about him should have drawn attention. And yet here he was, bonded to a Solari warrior, and now apparently a target for someone lurking in the shadows. His gut twisted, and he exhaled slowly, trying to push down the unease, trying to focus. Then he heard it, a shift in the air, a step that didn't belong, the faintest sound of movement behind him. He didn't think, just reacted, spinning on his heel, just as something lunged from the shadows, something fast, something sharp, glinting under the harsh jogging lights. But before the blade could reach him, before he could even register what was happening, Solari was there. She moved like lightning, one moment beside him, the next intercepting the attack, her arm snapping up, catching the assailant's wrist, her other hand striking with brutal efficiency, forcing them back, her movements precise, controlled, effortless. His breath caught as he stumbled back, taking in the scene, a figure clad in dark clothing, lean but strong, moving with trained precision, not some random thug, not some common criminal. This was an assassin. Solari did not hesitate. She pressed the attack, forcing the assassin to retreat, their blade flashing as they tried to counter her movements, but she was faster, stronger, better. He barely had time to react, barely had time to process before the fight shifted again. The assassin feinted left, then spun right, trying to slip past her, trying to reach him. But Solari anticipated it. She caught them mid-motion, driving her elbow into their ribs, sending them crashing to the ground. The assassin gasped, trying to rise, but she was already on them, pressing a knee into their chest, pinning them effortlessly, her voice calm, cold. "Who sent you?" The assassin struggled, but she pressed harder, forcing a sharp exhale from them. "Answer." A sneer, a sharp laugh, even pinned, even defeated. They showed no fear, they knew they were already dead. "You think this ends with me?" they rasped. "You have no idea what you've stepped into." Solari's grip tightened, but the assassins suddenly jerked their body, convulsing, eyes rolling back as a small device hidden in their sleeve pulsed once, twice, and then their body went still. He cursed, stepping back, his stomach twisting. What the hell just happened? "Self-termination," Solari said, her voice impassive. They were never meant to speak. He ran a hand down his face, trying to steady his breathing. "So what now? We just wait for the next one to show up." Solari rose from the body, her gaze unreadable. "No, we prepare." He let out a humorless laugh. "Great, fantastic. And here I thought my life was complicated," before he turned to her arms. "Crossed any idea why someone would want me dead? Or is this just another fun surprise from this whole bonding thing?" She studied him for a long moment, then spoke. "You are not the target." His stomach dropped. "What? They were here for me." His mind reeled, struggling to keep up with the shift in information. "So this isn't about me at all. Someone wants you dead, and I just happen to be standing in the blast radius." "Correct." He exhaled, shaking his head. "Unbelievable. So what do we do now?" She stepped closer, eyes locked onto his. You stay close to me, you do not go anywhere alone, and if another comes you do not hesitate, you run. He swallowed hard. And what about you? I do not run. Something in her tone sent a shiver down his spine. Not fear, not desperation, just absolute certainty, the kind that came from knowing exactly what she was capable of, exactly what she was willing to do. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. So this is my life now, hub bonded to a Solari warrior, being hunted by unknown enemies, just trying to fix ships and mind my own damn business. She nodded yes. He looked at her, took in the sharp angles, the steady gaze, the quiet strength, and for the first time since this all started, he realized something he wasn't sure he was ready to admit. He didn't want her to leave. He sighed, shaking his head. All right, fine. If we're doing this, we do it together. No more of this you fight, I run nonsense. If I'm bonded to you, then that means I stand with you. Her eyes flickered with something unreadable, something almost approving, then she inclined her head. Very well. He let out a breath, rubbing his face, muttering under his breath, just another day on the station, just another damn day.